all so much for being here. This is my lecture recital on how I compose music for video games. So we're going to jump straight into it. So my plan for this lecture, which is approximately an hour long, is first I'm going to give a quick personal introduction of who I am, for those of you who don't know. And then we're going to go through my general considerations for what I do when I start to compose new music, and my procedures that I go through, what I'm thinking about when I'm going to start composing music. So that's the first part of the lecture. The second part, I'm going to be using examples of music I've composed for conceptual video games, using a bunch of different techniques and things and approaches and paradigms that I use, techniques that I use for writing stuff. So we're going to go through these as they come up. I'm not going to talk through it now, we'll get there. So let's get straight into it. So first, hey to me, my name is Graeme. I'm an immigrant from the United Kingdom, moved here about 2 years ago, and video game soundtracks got me into making music. Like, I absolutely adore video game soundtracks. I love the immersion they bring to a player as they're engaging with an interactive experience. I've written a number of albums, 2 of which were concept albums for conceptual video games, and I'm wanting to do that a lot further and a lot more in the future. Really, my dream is to have my music put inside the video game industry in some sort of interactive media that gets spread around and people can hear my music and enjoy it whilst they're playing video games. So we're going to start talking about my general considerations, the things I immediately think about when I'm going to compose music. First, I'm going to talk about digital audio workstations. These are programs that people use when they make music. I use 2 different kinds. The first kind I use is tracking software. Tracking softwares are programs that are designed to program music for old video game consoles. We're talking from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And these, some of these programs are these. I've tackled a lot of these at some point, but the one I primarily focus on is LSDJ, which is Little Sound DJ. And that's one that programs the Nintendo Game Boy. And I'm going to be talking more about how that functions in a moment. The pros and cons of using these is that you get a very authentic sound of the early video game systems. It's going to sound like the old consoles because you are literally writing music for those old consoles and physically using them. Some of the cons are they have severe limitations because of the technology and the area they come from, which we'll talk about. And it's very time-consuming workflow. Like, this stuff takes quite some time to program and get to grips with. I'm going to talk through a little bit about why that is as well. And the other sort of stuff I use is MIDI data. MIDI data is used in a wide range of digital audio workstations. These are a few of them. I am quite good at Pro Tools and Studio One. Studio One is currently my primary choice, but there's a bunch of others as well. These give you the freedom to do anything because there is no limitations, unlike these tracking software. These just give you blank paper, you can do whatever you want. You can have as many instruments and all that sort of stuff. Some of them, they use emulated sounds, and some of them sound quite fake. So you're going to have a violin that's emulated. It's not going to sound like a real violin. So avid listeners can pick that up. So when I'm using MIDI data, there's 2 different things I use: virtual instruments and sound banks. Virtual instruments emulate stuff, so it's like synthesizers and things like that. Sound banks are libraries of sounds which the MIDI data will pull pre-recorded stuff from. So there's the 2 different things there. Virtual instruments I use. We're going to cover a bit of hybrid free a bit later on. They're all synthesizers. And sound banks I use are these. This one, Shreddage Free, is emulated guitar. It's a sound bank of guitars. Shreddage Drums is acoustic drums. So forth, like that. Automation of parameters. This is another thing I think is really important when working with MIDI data. So when you put in a note in MIDI, you say, oh yeah, I want a C to be played, and it can be quite flat. But if you automate things, you can add depth and life to the MIDI data, bringing like a more realism sort of feel to your music. And you can do all sorts of things with the parameters. You can pan, you can change the velocity, you can add vibrato. So I'm going to play a quick demonstration of this, right? What are we looking at here? This is a MIDI interface. Most people are familiar with it. Here I have a keyboard roll and I've programmed in a C. And I've programmed in a C. This is going to play from left to right. This first note has no automation on it at all, and this one has lots of automation on it. It has panning from right to left, back to center. It has pitch bend. It tells this is where you want to do vibrato, and up here I'm going to add some delay, and you should be able to hear the difference assuming the sound comes through. There's your norm parameters. And there's one with lots of parameters on it. So you can see the difference, right? If you're going to write all the MIDI data stuff with none of that stuff on it, it's going to sound really flat, it's going to sound really lifeless, it's not going to be particularly good. So you've got to really thinking about, automation of parameters. And obviously the last thing to think about is the limitations as well. Like if you're going to be using tracking software, the limitations are there, there's no way to work around them. But if you're working with MIDI, you can think, well, do I want to try and fake those limitations? Do I want to try writing something for an audio video game without actually using stuff like this? Like you can fake it if you know what the limitations are and work within them. So the tracking software limitations is stuff like the sounds that they can produce. These old devices can only produce a certain number of sounds because they have these pulse modulation sound chips. They have a limit on the number of simultaneous voices, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And they also have, because they have limited amount of memory, they have limitations on stuff like the length of the song and how many different phrases you can have in the song. Music. First, I'm thinking about the lead voices. These are the things that are going to stick on top. They're going to be the hooks. They're going to be the catchy melodies. They're going to be things like, the things you remember are the main attraction. Beneath that, you're going to have stuff like rhythmic support, like chords and just nice little bits. Then you're going to have bass, which is going to feel like your low frequencies. Everyone loves some bass. And then there's going to be percussion. We're going to get to that in a bit. So yeah, I think this way due to the time I've spent with tracking software, because tracking software have limitations in how many voices you can have, which we're going to cover in a bit. The other procedure I like to think about is like the structure of my songs, and I like to use this building blocks system. So to briefly sort of explain this, I like to work on this section first, the ABC. I tend to work on the chorus first, because that for me is like the main part of the song people are going to remember. People like to remember the chorus of the song. So I'll probably work on the chorus first, and then bridge out these other two, the verse and what the Americans call the pre-chorus. I call it the bridge. And you create those first, and I like to create a loop. And I think that once I've got that, I have like a block of music which can be played over and over and over again. And that's almost very similar as well to the old video game systems that I love so much that brought me into composing in the first place. So that's always my start place. I make something that will loop and loop and loop. And I'm like, cool, I got a song now. But obviously in one day you don't want it just to loop forever, you want to have an intro and outro. So what I'll usually do is once I have these three established, I will make variations on this existing material to create the intro, the outro, and then instead of just having intro, this outro, maybe you want to repeat this again. So you'll stick in a mid-late, or you'll do some fills, and make some interest in the structure, so it's not just this, this, this. But we're going to see some examples of how I use this system in some of my compositions coming up. And just to clarify here, the Americans call the bridge, and it's a bit backwards, I'm not going to dive into that. Let's get on with the compositions. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through these four major sort of like techniques that I use. These four approaches to writing music that I take. And each one I'm going to have some examples from written for different genres of video games. So we're going to start with tracking software, and we're going to look at the shoot 'em up genre, and we'll get to the other ones in a bit. Okay, so tracking software, as we recall, is stuff like programming these old video game consoles. And so many of the consoles from like the 70s to the 90s are very limited. Now I use LSDJ. LSDJ has 4 channels. And so if you remember I was talking about thinking vertically, this is why. I have one channel for the leads, one channel for rhythm, one channel for bass, and one channel for percussion. And this is kind of how it looks like. So when you flick this on, this is what you see. And unlike the MIDI digital audio workstations, these ones read top down. So this will play from top to bottom, not left to right. And across the top you have the 4 instruments which are numbered. And here's my vertical thinking sort of idea. And that's generally how I will work with this system. I'm going to dive a little bit more into how this kind of works. So I'm not expecting you to understand, but I'm going to try. So this is a number of different screens you will see when working with the Game Boy. You will start on the song screen, and then you have to sort of navigate around to the other screens. So, bear with me. It's going to get technical, but we're going to try. So, let's imagine you boot up the Game Boy and you want to start making a song. You'll start on the song screen, and you'll start over here on this blank space. There's nothing there. So first off, you'll press a button and you'll stick in a parameter. Comes up as 0, 0. So 0, 0 is information that contains groups of measures. So this screen, the song screen, is going to contain groups of measures. So now we want to go inside that. So what we need to do is we need to navigate around this program, which is in the bottom right of the screen. I'm going to blow that up a little bit so you can see. This is the navigation panel. And if you look at this sort of big T here, imagine that this is a cube that has been laid out flat, right? And we're on the S. And if you want to go to the C, you will go to the right. You'll go from S to C, you go to C to P, or you can go up and down to P and G. So you're navigating around this cube. So we want to see what's in that chain. So we'll navigate over to the right to the chain screen. So if we go to the right, we're on the chain screen, and now we're in chain 0, 0. And now all the inputs and parameters here is a 0, 0, a 0, 1, and another 0, 0. Now these here are the phrases of the music. These here are groups of 4 beats, and that's where we're going to put in our instruments. So groups of measures, groups of bars, single bar. So we'll go across the song screen and see what 0, 0 is. So now we're in phrase 0, 0, and this is where you actually input the notation data for the music you are trying to create. So this is 16 steps, 1 yanda, 2 yanda, 3 yanda, 4 yanda, and you put it in there. The instrument is what instrument is going to play this note, and the command here is where you do the automation I was talking about earlier. So if you want vibrato, if you want pitch bend, you would put it in this command level, you put a letter here, and you change it based on the value. You can read the manual. If you want to change the instrument, you put the instrument, come across, and here's instrument 0, 0, and how you would change the instrument. So that's a lot. Let's just hear how that sounds. Wow, isn't that amazing? So here's Studio One, which is a MIDI DAW, and I just want to draw some, comparisons to what I just showed you. So on the left here, we have all of these different instruments. So you don't have 4, you have all of these, and every single one of these blocks here is like the phrases. So it's very, very similar, really. It's just a different way of thinking. But here, there's no limitations, where the other one, there is. And here's Pro Tools, which you can see looks exactly the same. Like music. First, I'm thinking about the lead voices. These are the things that are going to stick on top. They're going to be the hooks. They're going to be the catchy melodies. They're going to be the things that, the things you remember are the main attraction. Beneath that, you're going to have stuff like rhythmic support, like chords and, just nice little bits. Then you're going to have bass, which is going to feel like your low frequencies, everyone loves some bass. And then there's going to be percussion. We're going to get to that in a bit. So yeah, I think this way due to the time I've spent with tracking software, because tracking software have limitations in how many voices you can have, which we're going to cover. I did not use this video, don't worry. This is how they look these days, but I picked a more, more viewable video. And we're going to go straight to that now. was there was no limitations and stuff. We're going to talk through now how that one was really kind of achieved. So we started with the tracking software with limitations, and it ended up being this, no limits sort of modernized song. So this obviously was using MIDI data with new stuff. So when I use MIDI data, you have the limitations stuff. We're going to talk about how I did some stuff for the racing genre next, using these no limitations. So, excuse me. So I wrote 3 other songs for the racing genre, the sci-fi racing genre, sci-fi space, sci-fi racing, that's me, right? So for this, it's like high speeds, there's floating tracks, dystopian societies, and the compositions I wrote were very highly EDM based. It's all electronic, it's all synthesizers, and influenced by these games. So because there was no limitations, I get to use a lot of instruments. So for these 3 pieces, one of them, the first one you're going to see is called Are You Ready? Here is all the instruments I used. And again, I use this sort of vertical thinking. So first off, I get my leads. I've got these 3 here. These are going to fill up my leads. Then I have these rhythms, 3 basses, I have a bunch of percussion. There's a small difference here in that there's red. The red tracks are for vocals, which are like the highest priority. If you're going to have vocals in a track, they need to be clear, they need to be heard, they need to be on top of everything. So that's like a bit of a new thing here. So this is Hybrid 3. This is one of the synthesizers I used. In fact, if we go back a sec, you can see I used Hybrid 3 quite a lot. It's all of these here, it's all of these here, it's there, it's quite everywhere. So when I'm using Hybrid 3, what I'll do is I will have an idea of what I want in my song. So for this example, I wanted some sort of atmospheric background noise that would just be able to add a layer of interest to my piece. So I looked through the presets of the Hybrid 3. I ended up finding something that sounded like this. And I'm like, that's cool and everything, but it's not really what I'm going for. I want something gritty, dirtier. I want something that has at least some sort of melodic information. I want something more. So I started looking at what I could change about it. And to get some more gritty sound, the first thing I changed was the filter, which I changed into this resample mode away from distortion, and I cranked up some of these dials, cranked up the gear, the envelope, and the resonation. I cranked this up because this makes it self-oscillate, which makes it make its own sound. And then I also thought that the other sound sort of came in immediately, and I wanted it to sort of ramp in. So I changed this ramp here so it would fade in slowly. And eventually, after you mess about a bunch, this is how it sounds. You see, that's quite different from where it started, but I feel like from finding a preset you think is almost close and has some of the qualities that you want, and working from that position, you save yourself not only a lot of work, but it just saves you a lot of work and effort. It's faster to do it that way. So another example of this was I wanted some chords, so I found another preset, which was the rich saw lead. Where's my mouse? There it is. And I found this instrument. And I was like, that's cool, but I want something with more punch, I want something with more like energy into it. So again, I cranked up some of these dials. These are the oscillators which produce the sound you're hearing. So I cranked those up and changed the way they sounded. I also turned this one up because this one was not activated in the original preset. I pushed it up in an octave just to make it sit higher, so it had a bit of a higher sound. And I also tweaked some of this stuff down here, which changes the effects and how the effects react, until I got to this sound. Again, you can see it's gone from one thing to something completely different. So like, you can read the manuals for these things and understand what each section does. I just find that working with something that pre-exists and then building what you want, knowing what you want, saves a lot of time. Actually using this thing. So let's see some examples of my work. So this first one, Are You Ready? Thinking about the building block system. This one is pretty much exactly what I said. Verse, bridge, chorus, with some stuff hooked around it. So you can see along the bottom, there's an intro, verse, bridge, chorus, a transition, verse, bridge, chorus, outro. Cookie cutter, exactly as I was talking about. So let's hear that one. Oh, and also, the videos for this one have incredibly high speeds and flashing lights. see the intro, which is a variation of the verse, and the outro was really just the chorus key change. So there wasn't really any new materials there, it's just the first bridge chorus, and then this crazy bit in the middle. So let's see another one. So this next one is Neon City. Now, these next two curveball. This one goes verse, chorus, bridge. What? That's not what I said. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that so long as you have these three building blocks, in my opinion, it doesn't matter the order of them, you're still going to have, I'm going to write a piece of music that I think works for me. So this one has more verse, and then goes into the chorus, and then there's this random middle bit in the middle, which is the bridge. So let's see how this one is. Again, fast speeds and flashing lights.
So I got one more of these for you in this sort of style. This one goes chorus, verse, bridge. What? So this is trying to demonstrate that I use the chorus a lot, and in my opinion it still works. Like half the song is the chorus. And that's pretty much because I had this little ditty that I just loved, which was this. And I'm like, I'm going to milk the heck out of that. I'm going to speed up the whole song. So I made that the whole song, so you're going to hear it now for the next 3 minutes. Yeah, that warning again. You've seen them twice now. This one's a bit slower actually than the other ones. hang in the middle. You're waiting for it to come back, which I think is quite nice. So those were all electronic. So okay, I talked earlier about using digital instruments to do like violin and all this other stuff. Can't sound very good. So this next section is going to talk about how I try to get the best sounding digital acoustic sounds like violins and pianos, and what I do to try and make them sound less fake. So that's
what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to use two different genres of games to demonstrate this. I'm going to use the simulation and Japanese role-playing game genres. So next we're going to talk about the simulation genre. So the simulation genre is about stuff that happens in real life: skydiving, management of businesses, forklift truck driving, you know, the stuff that you do. I took inspiration from this life sim where you build a house, you create a family, you move them in. And it's a little bit silly. There's like 160 Sims releases, if you didn't know. There's a lot of Sims. And their soundtracks are quite quirky, but they use a blend of electronic instruments and acoustic sounding instruments. So some time ago, I had an opportunity to compose a piece for the Winfield Quartet, who were like amazing. But they had this really awkward thing that for me I found very challenging. They had a pianist, a percussion player who played marimba, a cello, a tuba, not cello, what the heck, double bass, a tuba. And that's like two really low end instruments and two very percussive sort of instruments. I'm like, this is like really strange for me. But I wrote this piece and I had fun with it and I was like, oh, this sounds a lot like The Sims. And then he played it and I was like, that does sound a lot like The Sims, but it's not quite right. It needs the electronic component. So after hearing them perform like amazingly, I took it away and I was like, okay, what can I do to it then to make it really shine within the genre that I'm trying to achieve? So what I did is I faked their four instruments using MuseScore, which is a composing sort of program, and I bounced them from that program as fake acoustic instruments. So I had a marimba, I had a violoncello, I had a tuba. And I changed the piano to the violas because I was like, oh, it sounds way better as an epic string section. But what I'll do is I'll fake a piano with that and blend them together. And then I blended them all with all these different instruments. So this one had two strings and a massive, this one had a bunch of stuff. And by layering them and blending them with digital instruments, you take away the fakeness of the digital acoustic instruments and make them sound a bit more difficult to determine if they're real or not. So I want to also point out that a lot of people don't really agree with me on this, but I typically do not mind when an acoustic instrument is faked or sounds fake, because I grew up with the computer video games that I played where they were all faked. So for me, I don't particularly mind so much, and I find this perfectly acceptable, but I realize it's not for everyone. But this is my attempt to write, acoustic music with digital elements using only digital resources, and this is called Let's Build a House.
demonstrates like how if you just take, you know, acoustic instruments and layer them with other digital ones, they sound fine. And they do sound a lot like the games from the 90s and 2000s. So I have a couple more examples of this sort of thing. These ones are going to also incorporate guitar and drums, as seen earlier in the modern version of the Starfighter track, which they're all sound banks. You know, they're not real guitars, they're not real drums. They're calling from these libraries of sounds. They're also using piano, woodwinds, flute, and strings. There's two pieces. So the first one is called Onwards to Adventure. So far, every single piece we've heard has been fully digital. This next piece is still using those same techniques. It's still using, digital acoustic instruments. It's still using all these sound banks. It's still using synthesizers. But this one also features an amazing composer who played some saxophone for me, Dr. E, who's amazing. Mark Engelbrechten played some amazing saxophone licks for me, which I used in this piece. So what I did is to incorporate that, because none of these pieces have had actual recordings in them yet of people playing. So this one, I put some light effects on it. I kind of left it pretty much untouched. just to see, we're going to see now how that kind of works with everything I've been currently doing. And then we're going to move on to like, okay, maybe we should talk more about recording stuff. But first, let's hear this last piece for the Japanese roleplay genre, featuring Mark Andrew Batson. all the time. So yeah, we incorporated a real player performing saxophone, which was recorded in a studio. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is using recorded sounds, which is another thing I do, and then incorporating all these things together is really what I should do. So all these songs didn't really have recorded stuff, but this next one kind of does. These next two examples do. So the last thing I want to talk about is electroacoustic composition and live performance controls. So electroacoustic composition is the idea of recording sounds from the real world, but then editing them in such a way that they're no longer recognizable as to what they were. So if you record the saxophone and you messed with it, it shouldn't sound like a saxophone at the end. That's really what makes electroacoustic composition. So I'm going to see some examples of that stuff now. So in the next couple of songs, I recorded a bunch of stuff like wind chimes and a train and some high winds and some random hitting things around the house, and I changed those sounds into other stuff. I did that using automation and a bunch of effects. And I'm also going to talk about live performance controls, since I'm going to do a little bit of faffing around with these next couple of songs. So before we get to that, let's talk about what I did for these two songs. So I'm going to be looking at using examples of the first-person shooter game for these next two song examples. The first-person shooter game has people looking through the first-person perspective, so you're looking through the eyes of your avatar you're controlling, and you use a variety of weapons to shoot people and stuff like that. And I drew heavy influence from the more modernized games, the Doom franchise, composer Mick Gordon, who I think is amazing. And I analysed how the songs kind of work in the more modern sort of Doom games. And the way it works is that there is like a calm atmospheric track, which will play when the player isn't really experiencing anything of like notes, like there's no monsters to fight, they're just exploring, they're looking around for secrets and whatever. And then there's this high energy combat track, which will get your heart pumping and racing or whatever. Whenever there's danger around and you have to defend yourself and you have to get your shotgun out or whatever, and blow some heads off some demons and stuff. And so generally what will happen is the game will start in the calm mode, then it will jump into the combat song until you've defeated all the enemies, in which case it will like transition out of danger back to the calm track. And it will kind of repeat this, but like when it jumps into the combat track, it will jump in at any sort of point in the combat track, like the start of a certain group of measures. So I tried to make my songs with this in mind. So again, here's the building blocks idea. I've done that sort of same thing again, but the thing that's different here is that there's really two different tracks in both these music. There's an ambient song, which is here, and also at the end. And then there's this combat song with transitions in and out. So that's what we're going to do. And then before we get to that, I'm going to set up my little keyboard. So what I've done here is I have a MIDI keyboard which is connected to this Glitch program. Now Glitch is just a program that can call up a bunch of effects. And what I've done here is I've programmed this MIDI keyboard to be able to trigger in a bunch of effects as I press the notes. And so what's going to happen is as this song is playing, when I can find the controls, there they are, when I find the controls, I'm going to be just randomly pressing these buttons throughout the song to do some random effects on, because if you're going to be performing this stuff to other people, this makes it a bit more fun and brings a live element to the music. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the song, and then I'm going to try and play the video, but the video time code may be slightly out of sync because of the way I'm doing this. So start that. Hey, I said start that. There we go. And go to that, and then press that. There's lots of violence in these videos, by the way, lots of gore, lots of guns. So the song has begun, and there's the atmospheric track kind of going, and if I press some buttons,
Alright, so I've got one more for you. The trick with the last one, right, which is a bit silly, is the last one is called, hey, look, I did not say at the start yet, stop. The last one's called Science Cat. It's called Science Cat because all of the ambience, all of the electroacoustic composition is recordings of a cat. So in the ambience, the intro and the outro, all of the background noise and stuff are sounds of a cat that have been twisted and warped into different sounds.
It is pixel.
This will be the final one. I'm probably going to mess around with the keyboard again because it's fun. I'm going to have to set it up again. So let's have a look. So I go here, I press the thing. Is this still working? Yes, it is. Press the thing. Go here. The real star. Yeah, obviously, thanks to Mark for being awesome and everyone for being here. Some references. taking into considerations that I have these 4 different techniques, and understanding kind of how I write my music. You'd be able to like listen to my music and be like, oh, maybe that's kind of how he did it. Kind of how I did it now. I'm open to take any questions if anyone has any. Hi.
What did you do with Pixel to make that? How did you do that?
That's just kind of standard stuff, record him and then you run it through a bunch of pitch bending and transposition, like you de-pitch it, you high pitch it, you stretch it out, you squash it. That's any sort of thing you can do with audio. Hi.
Did you have to kind of change the tone, or did you have to like make the saxophone sound a little more digital to make it like blend better with digital components, or do you find that layers apply the way that?
I found because I used some layers in that song, I was already trying to emulate acoustic instruments such as the strings, the violin, flute and stuff. I was happy to leave it as it was. I just kind of pushed it to the forefront as like a feature of the piece because, unlike the rest of it, it was actually a real player. I did add some delays and reverb stuff to it to just kind of give it a little bit of an edge, which wasn't like natural. It pulled out a bit of the higher frequencies in it. But other than that, it's relatively unchanged.
Well, so like at the end, you doubled it with the guitar.
That's right.
Which is a really interesting effect because it becomes sort of like a bad instrument combining with.
That's right. So I did do some parallel lines, which is the idea of the blending that I was using. But the actually touching the saxophone, it was pretty much untouched. Hi.
So is there just a bunch of songs written out there that people are waiting to choose games for?
I mean, usually a composer would be presented a project. Yeah, we're a project. They'd be given art assets and direction, and they'd have to try and compose for the scope of the project.
I know you were working on one point where you said you wish they would move along because it's kind of holding you up a little bit.
They haven't been back in touch for a long while, so I don't know how that's going on yet. I had too much going on to get back in touch with them, but I probably will be back in touch with them relatively soon to see what's happening with that.
And so my other question is, because I don't do video games at all, my nephew has tried, I'm just going to failure at him, but so the one that you have the soft parts and when it's happening, does that occur kind of automatically with the game then?
That's right. So the Doom engine is running on, I think it's Unreal, and Unreal has a program in it called Meta Sounds, and the Meta Sounds will be checking every few seconds for triggers that happen within the game. So when the player sort of shoots an enemy or whatever, it will know, oh, there's been a combat, let's switch to the combat track. And it's very interactive in that way. It's called dynamic sound. And I have another paper on dynamic sound if you'd like to read it at some point, which explains it a lot.
That's why my games are so quiet, I guess. Not too much happening.
Mark?
So I have a question. I'm really fascinated by this concept of demaking a piece.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about it a little bit. But if you have the 3 versions, you start in the middle, and you basically demake it to degrade it a little bit. What do you call the step down?
That's true. That's a good point. I wouldn't know. Enhancing? We enhance the piece?
Yeah. But anyway, I thought just to think about a little bit more about that concept. You were saying there's somebody who this is like a concept that they developed,
I don't think he developed it per se, but he did do a number of videos on it. He's called Ben Kidd, who runs a YouTube channel called 8-Bit Music Theory, and he covers this a lot. How he compares how games were released on the SNES and the Genesis or the Mega Drive will later release some stuff like the Game Boy and stuff, and the Game Boy isn't as capable as these other consoles. So in order to re-release these games on these consoles, the whole compositions had to be demade. And he kind of analyzes stuff. Particular one he covered was Mega Man. I think Mega Man X or something, which came out on the SNES, was demade to be released also on the Game Boy for extra sales. And they're very, very different. They're very, very different compositions because of how intricate the composition is on the SNES, and how they had to make it work with limited channels. It's pretty cool. It's very, very different songs almost because of how it works.
Yeah, so it's really specifically related to retrofitting music in video or concert.
Yeah. If anyone would like to actually hear that, I wasn't lying. That first piece was written on this, and I can play it back from this. This is how I just plug this in and record it. Don't know if you can hear that at all. I'll walk around a bit a little bit. Let's turn this off.
You can hold it up to the microphone if it's on your face.
Maybe real nostalgic.
Any other questions? And you'll be free to go. The doors are unlocked. Yeah, sure.
So when you're, like in your line of work as applying for jobs, you just contact game makers and see what they have
That's going to be the plan. Very competitive market, unfortunately. Alright, I think you're free to go.